Hello everyone, I hope you're doing well. Today I'm talking with Peter Fonagy. Peter is a clinical psychologist and psychoanalyst who is well known for his significant contributions to psychodynamic theory, thought and practice, most known for perhaps his leading contributions to mentalization-based theory and therapy, which is a psychodynamic intervention. In this conversation, Peter talks about his sort of his own journey and his with regards to his career and what the etiology and the sort of historical trajectory of mentalization, and then also Peter candidly shares some of his own anecdotes from his career as well as some of his own quirks, and then lastly Peter shares about his perspective on trauma and speaking to this idea of perhaps the most traumatic thing that one can endure is is for a mind to be alone in the world and to feel that no other mind can connect with it or make sense out of it. But yeah, it was a really good conversation. I enjoyed it, so I hope you do too. For those who aren't perhaps that familiar with mentalizing or in regards to MBT, could you define mentalizing as it's understood in MBT and perhaps drawing from its, at least my understanding of its evolution, which sort of came out of the kind of maybe the 80s and 90s with this sort of increase in interest in sort of theory of mind.
Yes, mentalizing in a way comes from theory of mind, the theory of mind literature in the 1980s, where there was really a paradigm that was based on the so-called displacement task, where a person was observing someone else, observing the location of an object, then absenting themselves, and then coming in the meantime, the location of the object changed, then coming back. Where will they look for the object in the original place, on the new place? And if you had a theory of mind, then you would say in the original place rather than the new place. So that's as sophisticated as it was. And people talked about that as a theory of mind, which then very quickly became a very overburdened concept. And in 1989, my sense, and I think alongside other people thinking about, is that this is really a very fundamental aspect of human activity that involves a great number of capacities that we put into this box of awareness of other people. But as a psychoanalyst, I also thought that this is actually also to do with the awareness of oneself. So it's not just a theory of someone else's mind, it's also how one thinks about one's own experience of mental states. And Uta Frith and Chris and John Morton, who were at that point in the developmentalists in the MRC cognitive development unit, wrote a chapter, I think they wrote, and I wrote a paper at the same time without referencing, neither of us referenced the other, although we were in the same university. I didn't know what they were working on, and they had no idea what the psychoanalyst tucked away in some back room in psychology department was working on. Anyway, so I published a paper at the same time saying really that the word mentalizing was better than theory of mind to describe this capacity, because it was so fundamentally to do with being a human being. And really that's where it started. So mentalizing, whether because of Uta Frith or because of me in different cultures, took over from theory of mind quite appropriately. And now people talk about mentalizing rather than having a theory of mind, although some people default to that.
Mm.
I am very keen that it's recognized that mentalizing is, its origin a psychoanalytic concept that probably started in France, where it was called Mentalisation, and it referred to the symbolic level of representing drives,
Right.
which obviously is much, much more than that. But that's the psychoanalytic route that in the paper that you were talking about, I'm trying to refine in some way, that it is originally not a cognitive psychology concept, but a drive theory psychoanalytic concept, born in 1950s in the École psychosomatique de Paris in France, very strongly influenced by Lacan, obviously, where Pierre Marty and de Mouzon and a bunch of others recognized that some people couldn't have a symbolic representation of their subjective states, and they developed psychosomatic problems as a result. So they weren't concerned about awareness of the other, they were concerned about awareness of the self, and the absence of that would lead you to having a profound deficit that led to major physical problems. So it's quite interesting to me that the psychoanalytic approach to mentalizing comes very much from within the self. The cognitive psychology comes from very much from the awareness of the other. And it's neuroscience where it's suddenly, well, I'm not entirely being fair here, but neuroscience recognized that actually the part of the brain that does self-mentalizing and mentalizing other are identical. That, it is not that easy. People said that Mal is more ventromedial, but dorsomedial, whether the self or the other. Turns out, I think, the best evidence is that really the two are quite close. The reason for that is actually antedates even the École psychosomatique de Paris, because the reason for that is likely to be in Hegel and in Lordship and Bondage and the Phenomenology of the Spirit, where Hegel makes it very clear that our awareness of ourselves comes through our awareness of others' awareness of us.
Yes.
And that this dialectic is a part of the remarkable birth of the self through the other. And of course, that was then rediscovered by us. We started referring to Hegel in the 1990s, but then in the relational school of psychoanalysis, it was again rediscovered by Tom Ogden and Jessica Benjamin and a whole group of remarkable psychoanalytic scholars who were working in an analytic space found this closeness of Tom Ogden, the third, this analytic space where you become aware of another's awareness of you, that creates an alternative perception of yourself. Then people can talk about Winnicott and can talk about all kinds of things, So is it basically, to me, the bottom line is that if there's a good idea in the world and somebody else has discovered it before, and finding out where it originates is probably a fool's errand. It's not something that generates productive.
Sure.
I mean, it's the scholarship on it is probably interesting, but for us clinically, I think it's for somebody who's interested in MBT and mentalizing. To me, Freud discovered mentalizing in discovering psychological therapy because he said that my understanding of you as a patient will benefit you, will benefit your understanding, because it'll give you insight. And insight is really not insight into oneself, but insight into the other, insight into my understanding of George's understanding of me.
Yes. Right.
Do you see what I mean? So to me, if you like, you want to attribute mentalizing to somebody, attribute it to Freud. Look at everything else.
Attribute everything to Freud. Yeah, I was thinking that the other day, actually, in a way. It's sort of like people sort of say everything's a footnote to Plato. I sometimes wonder, is everything a footnote to Freud? But on the MBT stuff, and you mentioned some of the French, sort of psychoanalysts, and I know at the similar time in the 90s, there was Lecours and Boucard who were sort of also doing their sort of drive-based account. But just for those who are perhaps not too familiar with MBT, it'd be fair to say, or at least, if you can correct me, but essentially you were also working with children at the time, and you'd noticed there were these sort of two modes of perception or mentalize, or rather lack of perhaps mentalizing, which were psychic equivalence, and then this other one, which is a sort of pretend mode, whereby the child's either stuck between everything's too real or it's too painful, so they flee from reality into this sort of pretend world. And that actually mentalizing is almost whereby the child's able to sort of integrate these two so that they're able to play with reality and sort of represent things and see things from the other point of view. And then I think what happened was basically people started to realize individuals who fall under the disorder of borderline personality disorder as adults appear to also sort of find themselves frequently within one of these two modes of perception. And so then that sort of all coming together led to, and that's why perhaps MBT, or fueled MBT in a sense, because there was this population group who needed, or it was clear that were sort of needing some sort of therapeutic model which they didn't currently have. Does that make sense?
Totally makes sense, and historically not quite right, but it's because the first clinical application of that understanding actually came from a child psychotherapist by the name of George Moran, who I worked with at a Freud center. And George was a very close friend, sadly, lost to motor neuron disease by the time he was 41. So, it was a tragedy. But he and I had started something that we call the Saturday Club. And the Saturday Club, we were both analysts, and we were both kind of keen, committed psychoanalysts, and of an Anna-Freudian tradition, a very kind of classical, libidinal psychoanalyst, if you like, and thinking about defenses and all that. And we were working with children who had brittle diabetes, what was called then brittle diabetes, which meant they had insulin-dependent diabetes from childhood very early on because of pancreatic failure. It's a terrible disease and was even worse then. But there were these adolescents who were not able to control their diabetes, not able to maintain their blood glucose between kind of roughly normal level. Even they were doing kind of blood tests, it seemed like so that there's something wrong with their physiology. And George started treating them when they were admitted because of ketoacidosis. They were admitted to hospital, and he started treating them. And he had remarkable success with some of them. And that was kind of one side. But then in the Saturday Club, we came together discussing some of the cases that we saw. These children and others, children and adults, who, even though we were using psychoanalysis in the way that we were taught, didn't get better, just wouldn't respond. And we called it the Saturday Club because we knew that if we would take it to supervision, we would be just told that we didn't do it right. That the reason that it was that our results were not positive was because we didn't say it right or didn't say the right thing. And if we just said the right thing, then it would be okay. And we didn't believe that because we knew that we said the right thing and we knew that it wasn't. So we started thinking about what is it that we are doing wrong. And at that point, I think it was, I don't know whose idea it was, but it was George and I that came up with this idea that actually it's not as that we are confusing our patients, that our patients are unable to process what we are trying to put to them, that we just have to try to simplify in order to get what we then started talking about as mentalizing going. And, he invented this game that he played with this diabetic little boy that we wrote up is, what do you think I'm thinking about you today? It was a kind of first relational psychoanalytic intervention that, as far as I can tell. But he was very playful and very clear and had remarkable results. And then I worked with a young woman in a similar kind of way, and had very good results. And we started, and the interesting thing was that because at the same time, this measure of blood glucose that is kind of a long-term measure of glycosylated hemoglobin, so HbA1c, came into use. we were able to show that our patients improved, which the pediatricians that we're working with suddenly found, what the hell is going on? These patients that we can't improve, these two, young no-goodniks, clinical psychologists can improve, where, there is no justice in this world.
You're right.
And then George died, and I left the whole time. It's just too painful for me.
Right.
I took a sabbatical in his last year of life, and it was just, and I left this whole field of diabetes. I just couldn't cope with it. It's too painful. But I was training with a young psychiatrist called Anthony Bateman
Yes.
in kind of my analytic training, and he was made consultant to the Halliwick, which is a day hospital in a large loony bin, as we used to call them at the time, called Free and Barnett, on the grounds of this hospital. And he was an incredibly bright, very able psychiatrist who really wanted to help people. And he was a psychoanalytic psychotherapist, but was very much grounded in reality. And he and I got together and tried to adapt the approach that George Moran and I developed for diabetic children to the patients in the Halliwick,
Right.
who were by and large borderline personality disorder patients. Why? And that was Anthony, because he said, look, I've got these people that are occupational therapists, at that stage there were still social workers there, nurses, and they're very willing and they're very good with these patients, but they don't know what they're doing. They're not psychotherapists. So is there some kind of an easy thing that I can do with them, that I can train them in, that would make them into effective therapists? That actually, because if I try and teach them psychoanalytic psychotherapy, it'll make the patients worse.
Yeah.
And there was good evidence that psychoanalytic psychotherapy at that stage didn't work for this group. So we developed this approach, which just focused, like we did with diabetic children, on what you are thinking, what other people are thinking, what you are feeling, what other people are feeling, and elaborating the capacity to represent mental states in yourself and others. And then we linked it to the theory of psych-equivalence and pretend mode. And it fitted very neatly that when a patient was in psych-equivalence and when a patient was in pretend mode, we can help them back to mentalizing, that these were just signals that they've lost the capacity to mentalize. It was not useful to engage with that non-mentalizing, but we had to engage with something that would enable them to get over it.
Yes.
And that was the big insight. Again, I don't know if it was Anthony's or mine, but that's what actually seemed to make the difference. So when a person is in psych-equivalent mode and they say black is white, I know black is white. There's no use you telling me that black is not white because black is absolutely white. Then you don't start reasoning about it and arguing with them. That's the last thing. But you say to them, look, it must be so awful, but because, to me, those two colors are so different. But if you see the two as the same, that must be so difficult and so hard, because then you kind of get confused and you don't. So you side alongside them and see the world the same way that they do. Clarify be sympathetic and then clarify what they see. in your mind and in theirs, and then present an alternative perspective, you know.
Right.
But, you know, I find it so useful to distinguish, you know, when things are feel to me different, like black feels different from white. I find it so useful to see those things as well. I wonder how you manage without doing that. So I admire that. It's really very unique and different and powerful that you can just see those two things as being the same. But, you know, I would find that so confusing and so difficult, but you don't. So how is that? And then we are mentalizing.
Right. And actually, what you were doing there in that sort of role play is, to an extent, a form of contingent mark mirroring, in a sense. You know,
Yeah.
sort of reflecting back to the person, but then sort of highlighting perhaps as an alternative way. And actually, I think as well, I know a lot of what your then subsequent research, you know, looking into attachment and actually recognizing, I don't know if maybe it wasn't recognized prior to this, or maybe there were people discussing it, but often people who meet this diagnosis have, you know, experienced upbringings perhaps where there was a lack of, or, you know, inconsistency in that sort of process which you were just doing there, sort of. Yeah.
I mean, you know, that when you have a history of maltreatment, which 80% of those people that can recollect as having had. Now, you know, whether it's a biological predisposition or not, because probably a lot more people have been maltreated than suffer from pervasive and persistent mental health problems that get a diagnosis of borderline personality disorder is, you know, I don't want to get into an argument about that, but when you have malevolent individuals in your life at an early stage, it is probably a very adaptive strategy to actually withdraw from that level of engaging with human beings, of thinking about what makes them do what they do. So I remember this case that, you know, that I was treating, and it kind of came to me. You know, it was I did adult attachment interviews. Because it's part of that. One of the questions: why did your parents behave as they did? And this young man told me, "You tell me you're the fucking psychologist," or something like that, which I didn't feel was terribly mentalizing. You know, it turned out that his father was an alcoholic who used to come home drunk. And when the boy was 8 and his sister was 6, would, for whatever reason, urinate on both the children. And when you think of a child trying to make sense of that, why is my dad doing this to me? You can understand that they would turn away from the possibility of making sense of people. And then when you are in that state, then, of course, when you turn away from wanting to understand others, in a way it's adaptive because you're freed from the possibility of pain, but it's also adaptive because you can do things that other people can't do, because you don't have to have empathy and you don't have to worry about what other people feel when you, and the young man that I'm referring to was someone who was being detained at Her Majesty's pleasure in a youth yeah. It's yeah. It's a very difficult situation for a young person like that. And they get trapped really in a terrible environment of cruelty to others. So he grabbed old ladies' handbags and would hit them, it's also antisocial. But he really didn't have a very clear idea of the impact that he was having.
Right.
And then, came a very elaborate theory that we had of how things are for people who are poor at mentalizing, and how they cope with adverse experiences.
Right.
And when you are not in your early childhood surrounded by someone, as you said, who mirrors your mental states in a way that you are able to internalize. That is, they don't mirror you exactly, but they mirror you in part, so that you can see it's not them, but it's you that they are mirroring. Then if you don't have that experience, and you then on top of that have terrible adversity, it becomes a real tragedy for that individual, because they get deeper and deeper into an avoidance of mental states, in particular contexts sometimes, but often in critical context where they could recover that capacity, and that is in close relationships. Yes. So that close relationships become toxic for these people, and they become places where they have to use psych-equivalence or pretend mode to actually just survive from day to day.
Right.
And that's really what we found at with these patients at Halliwick and Fiambarna, that you had to have sympathy with, if your mind works like that, it's a dreadful, dreadful place, because mild threats become existential threats really quickly. And the only way that you can escape from it is dissociating, moving into this pretend world. Mm-hmm. And what we also found is that you can bring people back from it by helping them to mentalize. And we were, because Anthony is a very hardworking psychiatrist, and because I'm a kind of a bit of I like numbers, and I have autistic traits. My wife is a psychiatrist, and one time it said, "Do you think I have subclinical Asperger's?" I said to her, and she said, "Subclinical?" She said, "So maybe I have, but that is no longer a diagnosis." But at the time, I could have had subclinical. Asperger's, anyway, in her view, is above the threshold. Anyway, all that aside, we did a randomized control trial, which turned out to be the best thing that we did. Again, I can't remember if it was Anthony's idea or mine, but because we did that, we got published in the American Journal of Psychiatry. And then we did a follow-up 8 years post-randomization, and the effects were maintained. And then we did a very large outpatient study, and there again we found, and that was a very good study. The first one was actually methodologically not so good, but the second one was actually quite a good study because we had a good control group who had all aspects of the treatment we offered, except for mentalizing, which we called structured clinical management. And there was, after 18 months of treatment, a difference between the groups, although they both improved.
Yeah.
So, that kind of difference got MBT to where it is. And now we've done a study, which I'm really proud of. We just finished a study published in Lancet Psychiatry on antisocial personality disorder.
Oh yeah, I've read it. Yeah, I read it. Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, it is unusual because, but it was, in a sense, my experience with that young man that made me think, look, these guys are treatable. They just like people with the diagnosis of borderline personality disorder, we can treat these guys.
Yes.
If we don't make it too complicated, we don't make it too hard for them to engage with the treatment.
Yeah.
But we discovered one other thing along the journey. I don't know whether you're interested in this, and that's very, very relevant to the whole issue of antisocial PD and our success in treating them. We discovered that group treatments were incredibly effective. And that was the case even for people with BPD, and people with the diagnosis of BPD would say, I don't want to go into group. I want to do individual. At the end of 18 months, they say, well, look, this individual, and we had both, we had individual and group, and they had to do both. And by the end of 18 months, they would say to us, quite a few of them, look, I kind of benefited a lot from the individual therapy, but what really helped was the group. And with the treatment of ESPD, we only had group. We didn't have individual. Or we had individual, but very mild, just once a month. And I think I know why, which just took me a long time to figure out. And this could be to do with my mild, I think, Asperger's. It's because people who are traumatized don't feel that people who have not been traumatized understand them. And there is this thing that you might have come across called double empathy, which people with a diagnosis of autism, autistic individuals have come up with, which is simply stated is that autistic people have a different understanding of people than people who are not autistic. And they understand autistic people. They don't understand people who are not autistic. And people who are not autistic don't understand them. So there is a double empathy failure. There are two groups that don't understand each other. And there are some lovely trials that one study particularly, that when the displacement task, that theory of mind task that I was talking about earlier, is done with autistic people, they appear not to have a theory of mind. They appear not to have, and that was the original demonstration going back to the early 1980s, Simon Baron-Cohen. But it turns out that you do the same task, and there is some subtle signs of theory of mind in using eye movement, kind of implicit theory of mind it's called, that if the person who is being observed announces at the beginning that they are autistic, then the autistic individual actually behaves as if they had a theory of mind, because they understand.
Right.
So I think that people who have been traumatized have the same double empathy problem, that they don't feel that people who have not been traumatized properly understand them, because they see the world so differently. And that when we have group treatment and they are with other people, there are all kinds of complications because, but actually they feel they are in a group that they belong to.
Right.
Where they understand how the people's minds work.
Yes. Which is very human.
Yeah. And when the therapist is there, you need the therapist there to keep the peace, but actually what benefits them is the other people. They recover mentalizing, not through the therapist so much, but from each other.
Okay.
Because they are able to do that kind of contingent mirroring to each other that the therapist can't.
Yes.
So, very late in my life, I had become a big fan of group therapy for this, and it's just because the kind of I would say the mistrust that a person with deep and powerful complex trauma has of other people.
Yes.
That actually makes them take a distance from them. And therefore they can't benefit from the closeness to another mind that might help them recover mentalizing in the normal way that we do.
Right.
Maybe temporarily lose it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I mean, you said many things there, but I think we won't have time to get lost in it. But that speaks to this notion, which I think in the more latter part of your career you've been writing on, which is epistemic trust, and the significance of that. And the other thing about all of this, it's with the groups and the understanding of the trajectory of a lot of these individuals in terms of it's making sense actually, given what they've gone through, it makes sense that they would adopt these strategies. And you said you don't want to get drawn into an argument on the terminology and stuff of diagnoses. I understand that, but what I find particularly interesting is I think one can't argue is that the research into mental that's been done in MBT, for those who do have contention with it, it very much does support this idea that these individuals have invariably been, and I think it would be fair to use the word traumatized, and actually, and that actually is, and ultimately it's almost like it's a coming back into the world. It's a sort of rejoining humanity in a way. And that's in this, I think the group anecdote you give there really nicely gives a picture of that. It's actually like coming back to join humanity, and so then it leads to that what you've spoken about in the past, that virtuous cycle. So then they go, well, I can trust these people a little bit, so maybe now when I go to the shop and the shopkeeper doesn't
Yeah,
smile at me, maybe, you know, it's I can trust that he's not going to attack me or something. Yeah.
exactly, exactly. Now, you've got to understand it perfectly. That's the point. And this extends beyond not feeling threatened by the shopkeeper. It also extends to I can learn about myself from the shopkeeper.
Yes.
The shopkeeper's reaction to me is something that I should learn about myself. And that's really the terrible isolation that epistemic mistrust places you in. So epistemic just means knowledge, that if we learn about ourselves from others, distancing ourselves from others, avoiding knowledge from others, places you in a terrible, isolated place behind a barrier of mistrust that you have to get over. And I believe that it's mentalizing that gets you over that mistrust. That because you feel that people are filled, you can't mentalize them, and that your mind is filled with thoughts that they might be having about you. You kind of can't trust one, and you can't learn from them about yourself or about the world. You are at a disadvantage in your voyage through the world and in your voyage around your own brain, around your own mind. And that isolation, that loneliness, I think is so core to the severe mental health problems that I've worked with all my life. That, being able to join them on a journey, which is what I feel mentalizing aims to do, is really doing, if I may say, God's work. It's doing something that we have been put on the planet for. Because even before Freud, people used to do psychotherapy, but they used to call it kindness and friendship. I do not believe that Freud discovered mentalizing. I believe it has been around all the time. We just didn't call it that. Freud did us a great service by, for the first time, commercializing it and making it into a business. But actually, before then, we had to do it, and we did do it, but we did for nothing. We didn't charge. And to me, if good days, I have humility, I really have to recognize that mentalizing is nothing new here. This is not a new discovery. It's just the very core of what it is to be a human being. To be there with others when they need you. That trauma is an experience of adversity when your mind feels itself to be alone.
Yes. And yeah, exactly that, yeah.
And if there is someone there for you and with you when you experience adversity, there is a way that you can work through it because of mirroring and because of all the other capacities that mentalizing provides, all the other understandings. When you're there on your own, it destroys you. And that really is what we have to do when we work with people who have been traumatized because they experienced adversity when they were alone.
Well, I think, I'm looking at the time, and I wonder if that's a good place to end our conversation.
It has been fun talking to you, George, and discover my psychoanalytic origins. I deeply respect my psychoanalytic colleagues and the psychological mindset that they impose on the world. Sometimes I have doubts about the claim for uniqueness and a special place that they claim in psychotherapy that I have more difficulty with. But I do think they have a good model of the mind. Anyway, thanks very much, George.
Thank you, Peter. Have a nice day, and all the best.
Okay, you take care.
Thanks.